Сьогодні
5:02
я
p.m.,
радий
so let's
вітати
not
доктора Філіпа
wait
Браунела
for long.
на нашій
Hi,
черговій
Tatiana.
лекції, яка
And today I'm glad
присвячена
to
науковому підходу і
meet
науковим знанням
here
в
Philip Brownwell
гештальт-підході.
on our
І
lecture
сьогоднішня
that's
лекція буде
dedicated to
називатись
scientific
«Значущість,
approach, scientific
валідність та
knowledge in
лікувальні
Gestalt
ефекти».
approach. And
І
our today's
це
lectures,
вже
it's
третя
called Significance,
лекція
Validity,
з
and treatment
з п'яти лекцій,
effects.
вибачте. І
And that's our third lecture
декілька слів
from
про
out of
Філіпа. Це
5.
клінічний психолог, гештальт-терапевт, автор
So now a
тренер і
couple of words about
дослідник з
Philip.
багаторічним
He's
професійним
clinical psychologist,
досвідом.
Gestalt therapist,
І,
the
на
author,
мою особисту думку, і, мабуть, не
trainer,
тільки на мою
and
особисту думку,
researcher with
Філіп
many years of
зробив
professional
такий дуже
experience.
значний,
And to my personal
найбільший, я б сказав,
opinion,
навіть
and not
історичний
only,
вклад в розвиток
Philip
сучасної
has
науки
made a very
гештальт-терапії.
significant,
Тому ми
maybe
зараз будемо
historical contribution into the
отримувати такі
development of
цікаві знання, практично з
contemporary
перших рук.
Gestalt
Що ж,
therapy
Філіп, я
science
передаю тобі
studies.
слово і
So now you will
дякую
get
за
the
цікаві лекції, які ти вже
very
зробив, і
important
за
knowledge from the
сьогоднішню
first
також
hands,
відповідь.
from the source. So now I'm passing the floor to you, and thank you for your lectures.
Thank you, Alexi.
You've
That's
already
very
given,
generous
and
in
for
your
today's lecture.
introduction. Thank you, Alexi. That's
So
very
today
generous in your
is
introduction.
it's rather
even more technical type of
today is
subject.
it's rather
This whole
even
one
more
of,
technical
this
type
whole
of
issue of research
subject.
tends to be technical.
This whole one
unpleasant for many
this whole
Gestalt
issue of
therapists
research tends to
who
be
consider themselves to
technical
be therapists,
and,
of course, unpleasant for many
and not
Gestalt
researchers.
therapists
And
who consider themselves
we
to be
live
therapists,
in
of
a
course,
time
in which
not
Gestalt
researchers.
therapy
And
needs an evidence
so
base.
we live in a time
in which Gestalt therapy
gearing up
needs
for
an
several
evidence
years,
base,
if not decades,
and we all
trying
know
to
that,
get we've been
or establish
gearing
a
up for
research
several
tradition
years, if
for
not
Gestalt
decades,
therapy.
trying to get
Or establish
since
a
research
tradition
requires
for Gestalt therapy.
at some point a statistical analysis. Since research requires
something
at some
that you're
point
curious
a
about,
statistical
some,
analysis, systematic investigation
something
of
that
thing
you're curious
that,
about,
you're curious about, some
systematic
investigation of that
somebody
thing that you're
needs to
curious
master
about.
the statistical
We need to expertise
somebody
that
needs to
we
master
need
the
in
statistical
doing studies, in doing research, expertise,
and so
that we need in
that's what we're
doing
talking
studies, in doing
about.
research. And so today I want to just clarify,
that's what we're talking
we have
about.
talked about terminology before. And so
this
today
time,
I want to
I'd like
just
to talk
clarify,
with
we
you
did
about
we have talked about
particular
terminology before,
terms
but
and
this
what
time
they
I'd
mean,
like to
because,
talk with you about, we hear these terms,
particular terms and what
used
they
rather
mean,
casually,
because
and we hear
in my
these
experience,
terms, they're not always
used
rather
used
casually,
accurately.
and in my
So we
experience,
need to
they're not
have
always
a good idea of
what we're
used
talking about
accurately.
So we
that
need
helps
to
even guide
have a good
what we're
idea
trying
of
to
what we're
accomplish
talking
when we
about.
put
Together various
and that helps
types
even
of
guide
research. And last time
what
we
we're trying
talked
to accomplish
and looked
when we
at
put different kinds
together
of research
various
designs.
Types of research.
So
And
the
last time we talked,
the terms
that I'm going to be using
different
today
kinds
are
of
related
research
to designs.
designs.
What is a person
So
trying to
the-
accomplish? The terms that I'm going to be using
and so,
today are related to the designs. What is a
see
person
some
trying
kind of
to
relationship
accomplish?
to that.
But
And so
I think we have, yes, we've got
hopefully
a
see
smaller
some
group
kind of
here today, so
relationship
we
to
can
that.
do this. But
what is
I think we have, yes,
we've
enough
got
of
a
a kind of
smaller
a
group here
introduction
today,
here
so
before
we
we
can
get
do
into the meat
this.
of this thing.
What
are your
so
interests or
enough of a kind of
curiosities
a
or
introduction here
questions?
before
What
we
brings
get
you
into
to
the meat
this
of this
particular
thing?
What are
lecture?
your
I'd be
interests or
curious.
curiosities or questions? What brings you to this particular lecture? I'd be curious.
Давайте я скажу. Ну, мені Я вважаю, що, власне, ці три слова – це серце досліджень, це те, що й
So
дозволяє
let me say, I think that those three
зробити
words are
висновок
the
про те,
heart
що ми намагаємося зрозуміти,
of
що ми намагаємося
research, of study.
дослідити,
That's what
і в тому числі
enables
допоможе
us
нам
to make a conclusion
укріпити
about what we are trying to
доказову
accomplish,
базу
what we are
гештальту, якщо
trying
дослідження
to
про
investigate,
доказову
and
частину.
also it can help us
Це есенція,
to
на мене,
develop
як на мене, есенція
the
дослідження
evidence
в якомусь
base
сенсі.
of Gestalt therapy. That's what we mean. So for me, it's the very essence of research.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Anybody else?
My microphone was off. Let me share a couple of thoughts. I've always had a microphone. I missed the first few lectures, so I don't know what's been covered. Let me share a couple of thoughts. But I've always had a. I missed the first few lectures, so I don't know what's been covered between the empirical. But I've always had a statistical analysis that I haven't quite resolved properly, and the existential meanings, statistical analysis. I am fascinated by the existential meanings that I understand them. I am fascinated by the therapy that I practice, but I really struggle. And I understand them. So I came to listen to research, and I really struggle with trying to wrap my head around evidence. So I came to listen to this idea of what constitutes evidence and try to wrap my head around. And the difference between significance and meaning, what constitutes evidence and significance, to learn from you, because I know you have meaning and blah blah blah. And been doing this for a long time. To learn from you, because I know you have sitting at a table, been doing this for a long time. With some books. I remember at a very early conference, sitting at a table, and I did all alone with some books. I did. Everybody walked past you, like talking about research. Now you are. I did. Everybody walked past you, like who's this guy? Now you are. Now I think you're the person to resolve this tension. I don't expect you to. That's my issue. But I'd like to hear your input. How to resolve this tension. I don't expect
Glad
you
to see
to.
you.
That's my issue.
And
But I'd like to hear your
yes,
input.
to be reminded of earlier days. I'm glad to see you. And yes, to be reminded of earlier days. If anybody else has questions or concerns or anything like that, you can certainly put them in the if anybody else has so what I'm going to do is to share the screen like that, and then we'll put them in the chat running here. So what I'm going to do is to share the screen, and then we'll be off and running here. There we go. Okay. So significance, validity, and treatment effects. Evaluating results, significance, considering validity, implications, and treatment effects. So evaluating results, a lot of what we're going to be looking at their implications here today relates to what you find when a lot of what we're going to be looking at research here today relates to, remember what you find when you lectures we looked at a research articles, and we saw that they have, and remember parts in previous lectures, so the two parts research articles, we're going to be saw that they really dealing with parts to all of this terminology. So the two parts that we're going to be really dealing with here section, and all of this terminology, where the researchers are showed methods section, what kinds of where the researchers statistical analysis showed people used, what kinds of instruments like questionnaires or statistical analysis things that like they that used, or actually what kinds of instruments like questionnaires or tests or whatever they did like that, or when they conducted actually the study, interactive. This is the methods. Whatever they did, looking at considering terms that are related to what happens in that section when people do the method, looking at methodology, considering terms, and then we're going to be looking at the section that was method that's usually called conclusions, and then we're going to be looking at the or discussion, the section that was, and that's where we look at the or discussion, and that's where we look at the importance. in the real world. Let's see, how can I put this? So what of the importance research in the real world, and the so what in the comparing these research projects two sections, and we're going to encounter the same terms. Comparing significance, validity, sections, and treatment effects, we're going to encounter the same terms of concern, significance, validity. So it gets kind of confusing. What are people talking about when they say of concern, when they use these terms? And that's so it gets kind of confusing. What are people talking about? A little bit more clear. Now, when they use these terms, and that's what I hope the slides can be translated. A little bit more clear. Cite any references like you have in an article. The slides can be translated. This is just to get I did not cite any references like you'd have in an article. This is just to get concepts. Yeah, we did across. That. Here's a check-in. Okay, so significance. In general, yeah, we did that. Here's a check-in. The quality of significance, worthy of attention. In general, important, or it's the quality of being worthy of attention. So adolescent education was felt to be a social issue of some significance. So adolescent education was felt to be a social issue of that's one meaning of significance was important to somebody. Another meaning is significance. The meaning to be found. That's one meaning of significance. Or events. Another meaning is of what was happening was clear the meaning to be found more clear to me than to her. Or events. So the significance of what was happening was clear to me, more clear to me than to an her. Article, and all of a sudden you come to something and you're reading along. It just catches you up. You have to stop an article, and all of a sudden you come to something and it just catches you up. More weighty. You have to stop. More concern. Think about that. It's more significant. Why? So then the last one. Weighty. Is the extent to which a result, like a result in then the last one, research project, is the extent to which a result expected to arise simply from random deviates from that in sampling. Expected to arise. So there's always errors, random variation research or errors in sampling. So there's no absolute answer. So there's always no final conclusion. In research is always so. There's no absolute answer. There's no one person does a project. Research is always in progress. That's the way one person does a project. Operates. Another person builds upon it. So people have to be at home with having good enough for now type. So answer. People have to be at home with having and that's good enough. They're in the research project answer. Results there's and that's always these there are in the research projects error or like results, I never could figure out always these little if you didn't know the subject all the way to begin with, like I never could figure out how much of error was there. If anyway, you didn't know the subject mathematical all the way to begin with, how could you figure out how much of error was there? But anyway, they statistical significance way of doing that. That's what we'll look at first here. Okay, so statistical significance indicates that the observed data would be improbable if significance alone indicates that the observed data would be by the null hypothesis. Okay, so what is the null operating in the manner specified? Well, when you start off to do a research project, okay, so what is the null hypothesis? Most people would have kind of an idea. Well, when you start off to do a research project, a lot of people, most people would have really the most kind of an idea aspect of doing therapy. That the relationship is really the most important. So that's probably the most significant thing that leads to positive outcomes. That's the hypothesis. So that's probably the most significant. The null hypothesis leads to positive outcomes. That's the hypothesis. You do the study, and what your stats. The null hypothesis show is like that you do the study and what your stats what your seem to have a show is that what you do is there was no. You ever seen when you're working on the computer? You ever seen that circle with the backslash through it? What you do is that's the null. You ever seen when you're working on the computer? Nullifying that circle with the backslash through it. Null hypothesis. That's the null. That's so nullifying the hypothesis. There would be a 0.05 chance of it happening. there would be,
in other words,
0.05 chance. Usually, they calculate,
in other words,
a 95%. Usually, they calculate a 95 leading to
chance,
a point that,
or
that a 5%
you're
chance
accurate.
that somehow
Leading to
things
a-
happened.
a
You didn't
point,
account for them. You
or
didn't get it
a
right.
5% chance
Something
that
happened.
somehow
Somehow
it was like,
things happened.
okay, maybe it was
You didn't
by
account
chance.
for them. You didn't get it right.
Maybe something was in there
Something
we
happened.
didn't figure on.
So it
and
was like,
okay, maybe it
so
was by chance.
a significant result
Maybe
means
something
the
was in there
data
we didn't
are
figure on.
improbable under the null.
So on.
A significant result
A
means the
significant
data
result
are
means the
improbable
data that
under
you've
the
got
null.
are
Improbable. A significant
When the
result
null
means the
hypothesis
data that
is-
you've got are
is accepted.
improbable. It does not, by itself,
When the null hypothesis
tell you why.
is accepted.
A
It does
statistically
not,
significant
by
result
itself,
indicates
tell
that
you
the
why.
observed data are sufficiently
A statistically
improbable.
significant
Under the
result
null
indicates that the
hypothesis did
observed
not happen
data
by
are
chance.
sufficiently
Didn't-
improbable
under the
wasn't
null
random.
hypothesis.
There was
Did
some
not happen by
reason
chance.
for the
Didn't,
results that
it
you're
wasn't
seeing.
random.
You
There
don't
was
know exactly
some
what they are,
reason,
but you
for
know
the-
what
for the
wasn't
results
by
that you're
chance.
seeing.
It wasn't.
You don't know exactly what they are,
Coincidence.
but you know what wasn't
A random
by
kind of
chance. It
coincidence.
wasn't
Just a
let's
coincidence.
see.
A random kind of coincidence.
Does that make sense?
Let's see.
Shaking of the
Does
head.
that make
Yes.
sense?
Okay. Related to that is
Shaking
another
of the
kind
head,
of
yes.
significance.
Okay.
Clinical significance.
What they call clinical significance.
Related to that
Now,
is another kind
this
of
is-
significance.
This is
Clinical
all
significance.
what they call clinical
still
significance.
Kind
Now,
of like statistical stuff.
This is all still.
If I saw that kind
clinical
of like
significance in an
statistical
article,
stuff,
I would think,
oh, this means
if I
this
saw
is
that clinical
clinically,
significance in an article, I would
important.
think,
oh, this means
how we work.
and
this
I'd
is
load
like
it up with all
clinically,
kinds of things that I know
important.
about doing therapy.
How
that
we
make
work.
and I'd load
important.
it up with all kinds of things
But clinical
that I know about
significance
doing therapy
asks
that make it
whether an individual
important.
client's
But clinical
to
significance
post change, that
asks
is, before you're,
whether an
say you're doing
individual client's
outcomes on Gestalt
to
therapy.
post change.
And so you
that
give a
is,
test to
before
the
you're-
person,
say you're doing
before the
outcomes
therapy
on Gestalt
starts,
therapy.
and then you give a
And
test
so
to
you
the
give a
person
test to
after
the person
therapy
before the
ends or
therapy starts,
sufficiently far
and then you
down
give
the
a
road.
test to the person
And you
after
compare
the therapy
the difference.
ends, you
or
compare them to see
sufficiently
if there's
far
a
down the
difference.
road.
And
And
so
you compare
when there is
the
statistically
you compare them to see if there's a difference.
And so
Then
when
you
there is
say
a statistically
clinically
significant difference,
It's significant to the
you
clinical
say
process. That
it's
was going
clinically
on.
significant.
It's
Significant to the clinical
see.
process that was going along.
It's the change scored. Here's the technical part.
Um,
It is the change score
see.
divided by the standard error.
It's
of
the
difference
change
with
scored
values exceeding
here's the technical
1.96,
part.
indicating
It is the
reliable
change
at
score
the
divided by the standard
0.05
error of the
level.
difference with values exceeding
This is where I also
1.96,
tell you
indicating
that I
reliable
hate math.
change at the 0.05
I feel like
level.
when I was a
this
kid,
is where
I
also
jumped
tell
into
you
a
that
pool
I
and
hate
hit my
math.
head on
I
another
feel like
a
I'm
kid's head, and I was
when
like
I was a kid,
unconscious
I
under the
jumped
water
into
for
a
little
pool
while.
and hit my head,
And I'm sure
another
that something got
kid's head, and I
shattered
was
in
like
there
unconscious
that
under the
relates
water
to
for a
math.
little while.
I do not
And
know
I'm sure
how
that something
I
got passed
shattered
my
in there
statistics
that
class in my
relates to
doctoral
math.
program.
I do not
I think
know
it was a miracle,
how.
but I
So
passed
I
my
come across
statistics
something like
class in my
this
doctoral program.
statement that I just gave
I
you,
think
and
it was
it
a
just
miracle,
gives
so
me
I come
hives,
across
kind
something
of.
like this statement that I just gave you,
But-
and it just like gives me hives.
Research
kind of idea. Speaks the language of
But-
mathematics. I mean, or vice versa. You just can't escape.
Research is
Here's
speaks
another
the
one.
language of mathematics.
Significance.
I mean, or vice versa.
All,
You
there
just
is something
can't
called
escape.
practical significance.
Here's another one.
It overlaps with
Significance.
clinical significance.
All,
there is something
it's
called
really a broader
practical
term.
significance. It's
It
applicable
overlaps with
outside
clinical
of
significance,
clinical context.
but it's really a broader
it's just
term,
like
which
it's
makes practical
applicable
sense to me.
outside of clinical context.
Whether an effect
it's
is
just
large
like,
enough to
which makes
matter
practical
for
sense
some
to me.
practical
It
purpose.
asks whether
Whether
an
the
effect
cost
is large
time,
enough to
and
matter
effort
for
of
some
an intervention
practical
are
purpose.
justified by the magnitude
Whether the cost,
of benefit.
time,
So
and
this
effort
concept
of an intervention
right there,
are
like
justified by the magnitude of benefit.
We're going to get
So this
to that
concept
right there,
like
when we get to
of
treatment
benefit,
effects, and we
we're
look
going
at
to
something
get
called
to that
the effect size.
when we get to treatment effects, and
So,
we look at something
practical
called
practice
the effect size.
practical should be practical
So,
significance.
Practical
would be related to
practice,
figures of interest and depend on how
practical
important
should be
something
practical
was to
significance
begin with.
would be related
even
to
before
figures
any
of
kind of
interest
systematic
and depend
investigation.
on how
So
important something
when you're
was to
trying
begin
to
with,
evaluate
even before any
if
kind of
something
systematic
was
investigation.
worth the effort,
So
then
when
that
you're
depends on
trying
how
to
important
evaluate
the something was
if
to you
something was
to begin
worth
with.
the effort,
Right?
then that depends on how important the something was to you
All right.
to begin with. That's
Right?
significance. And you can see that there,
All right.
when we're talking
That's
about significance,
significance.
is
And you can
therapy
see
significant? Well,
that
depends.
there-
When we're
you know,
talking about
when you were doing
significance,
research, it
was
depends on
is
what kinds
therapy
of
significant?
significance
Well,
you
depends.
are talking about.
You know, when you were doing research, it
Most
depends
people
on
are
what
talking
kinds of
about
significance,
some kind of
you
practical
are
significance.
talking about. If it's important,
Most people are
if
talking
it's,
about
theoretically
some kind of
significant, is it
practical
related to the
significance,
theory
if
that
it's,
we like?
important,
Things like that.
If it's
what
Jay was talking
theoretically
about,
significant, is
what
it
is
related
the
to the theory that we
existential
like? Things like
sense
that.
of
what
I'm
Jay
doing
was
here?
talking
Is it
about
related to
what is
anything?
the
Like
existential?
there could be an
sense
interesting
of
research
what I'm
project
doing
that
here.
looked at
Is
our
it
theory,
related to anything?
and
Like
then
there
compared it
could be
to
an existential
interesting research
philosophy and some
project
kind
that
of
looked at our
systematic
theory,
exploration,
and then compared it to,
by the way,
existential philosophy.
what
and some
I'm
kind of
sharing with you
systematic
is related
exploration.
to by the way,
Side of
what I'm sharing with
research
you
called
is related
quanta-
to let's see,
quantifiable
side of
quantification
research called
numbers.
quanta.
And there's a
let's see,
whole nother kind
quantifiable
of
quantification.
research, which is more
Numbers.
like phenomenological. It's more experiential.
And there's a whole nother kind
It's
of
not necessarily
research,
related
which is
to
more
numbers,
like
phenomenological. It's
can
more
be
experiential.
analyzed.
It's not
with,
necessarily related
statistics.
to
They
numbers.
can do a
but
statistical
can be
analysis of it, but the whole
analyzed
design
with
of the research
statistics.
doesn't
They
start off
can
with that
do
in
a
mind.
statistical analysis of it, but the whole
The reason we're
design
doing
of the
this
research
is
doesn't
because
start off with that in mind.
Unfortunately,
The reason we're
to,
doing this is
provide the kind of
because
support that Gestalt therapy needs.
unfortunately,
we need
to
quantifiable
provide the kind of
kinds of
support that
research.
Gestalt therapy
So
needs.
we're stuck with that.
We need quantifiable.
So now we look at something called validity.
kinds of research.
By the way,
So
I
we're
was
stuck with
talking
that.
to Alexei before
So
everyone
now we
came
look at
on,
something called
and
validity.
I told him I had to leave.
By the way,
early.
I was
so
talking to
we've
Alexei
got
before
about
everyone
an
came
hour
on, and
left.
I told him I had
We
to
may
leave
get through
early
the slides.
so
We've got
before
about
that,
an
in which
hour
case I would
left.
be interested in having
We
some
may
kind
get
of a
through
brief
the
discussion
slides
if you're up for it.
before that,
in which
Anyway,
case I
so
would be interested
validity
in having
comes in
some kind of a
two,
brief discussion if you're up for it.
categories.
So
One is
anyway,
measurement
so
validity.
validity comes in
and
two
the other one is inferential
categories.
validity. And
One is
these two
measurement
categories relate to what I
validity,
was telling you about
and the other one is
sections of
inferential
a
validity.
research
And these two
article.
categories relate to
The
what I was telling you
methods
about the
section has
sections
to do with
of
measurement
a
validity,
research
and the
article.
conclusion or
The
discussion has to do
methods
with
section has to do with
validity.
measurement validity,
And so
and the conclusion or discussion
all
has to do with
relate to
inferential
the issue of
validity.
significance too.
And
So measurement validity,
and they all relate to the issue of significance too. So measurement validity.
when I started studying this, I thought, I reached a point where I just when I started studying this, I thought, to be kidding. I reached a point where there's so many different ways to think. I just kind of said to myself, "You've got to be kidding." Measurement alone, and we'll there's so many different ways to think. So this has to do with the degree to which measurement the evidence, alone, and we'll look at a few of them here. The results. So this has to do with the degree to which the evidence and theory support the interpretations of test scores for proposed uses. Evidence and theory support several sources of evidence rather than scores for proposed uses. But the older typology is still with how the several sources of evidence rather than several types. What does that mean? But the older typology is still how the field talks. People started worth knowing. So what does that mean? Heavy duty. That means that when people started doing who was doing heavy duty investigation, statistical analysis, people who were constructing tests. Who was doing the investigation? People who were creating tests. People who wanted to make sure, for instance, that one term was not just talking about. People who were creating two terms were not talking about exactly the same thing. That one term was not. And they wanted to make sure that the two terms were not talking about exactly the same thing in itself, so that you. And they wanted to make sure the same kinds of results every time you gave a test was sound. You were testing things so that you could get basically the same kinds of results every time you gave a test. Now, you were testing things that we're interested in other kinds of issues. And so now the same kind of we're interested in other kinds of test maker issues. Period. And so to put it the simply, same kind of is carried over into from the test more maker significant period making kinds to put it simply issues or is carried over into the. So we start with the measurement meaning validity, and the first one here is content validity, and it asks. So we start with the measurement validity, and the first one here is content adequately sample the construct whether the items of a measure. This is confusing adequately because there's another kind of validity called construct validity. This is confusing because there's another kind of validity called construct validity. The contents of your study. This just says, were they the contents of your study? For instance, a depression inventory that leaves out anhedonia or suicidality. A depression has a content that leaves because it doesn't have anhedonia or suicidality. Range of contents has a content problem because it doesn't have the full that you could test complete range of contents to be analyzed. That you could test people for instance. So content validity is established through expert judgment and systematic domain mapping. So content validity is established when you come up with the judgment and systematic domain mapping, not you're going to put into a questionnaire. In other words, when you come up with the contents of, it would be wise to ask a whole bunch of questionnaire. What they think goes into the questionnaire. It would be wise to ask a whole bunch of experts. Incidentally, is what they think goes into the questionnaire. We have the incidentally Gestalt therapy fidelity score. I've forgotten her name. Fidelity scale. We have the Gestalt therapy and the way in which that was constructed is that the researcher. Madeline, and the way in which that was constructed is that the researcher, what she did is she went out basically and asked a whole bunch of people considered to be expert. So what she did is she went out basically and what they thought a whole bunch of people did when they were to be expert Gestalt therapists, practice Gestalt therapy. What they thought those contents went into people did when they eventually when it was practice Gestalt therapy, and those. So that's content validity is scale eventually valid number of contents. So that's content and there's validity. Criterion validity. Valid number of whether scores correlate with an external standard. And there's criterion validity. Concurrent validity scores correlate with an external standard. Contemporaneous criterion validity Does the PHQ
uses a
9,
contemporary,
which is
contemporaneous
a
criterion
instrument for depression?
Does the PHQ
agree with a
for instance,
structured
which is a screening
clinical interview
instrument
administered the
for
same day?
depression?
In other words, you give the screener
Agree with a
to
structured
the person
clinical interview
and then you
administered
interview the
same day.
person.
In other
or
words, you give
vice
the
versa.
screener to the person,
Do they agree
and
with
then
each
you
other?
interview the person, or vice versa.
Predictive validity uses a future
agree with each
criterion.
Does not
Predictive validity
pre-treatment
uses a future
severity
criterion.
predict dropout? For
Does not
instance?
does a
The quality of a
pre-treatment
criterion
severity
is the limiting
predict
factor.
dropout?
A
for
measure
instance?
cannot be validated
The
against
quality of a
worse
criterion
standard
is
than
the
itself.
limiting factor.
A
So you have to have a
cannot
good
be
standard,
validated
a good
against a
criterion.
worse standard than itself.
So you have to
by
have a
which you
good
can measure
standard, a
other
good
kinds of things.
criterion. Then there's something called face validity,
by which you can measure
when you
other
look
kinds of
at
things.
something, it seems to be true.
In
Then
other
there's
words,
something
it
called
seems
face
you
validity.
expect, oh yes, that's
When you look
that's
at
what I would
something, it
expect.
seems to be true. Whether the
In other words,
measure
it seems
looks
you expect,
reasonable,
oh yes,
it is
that's what I would
psychometrically, that is
expect.
statistically
whether
trivial.
the
It doesn't
measure
matter
looks
whether
reasonable.
it is psychometrically, that is
sounds
statistically trivial. It doesn't
because,
matter whether it has practical
statistically
value in the real world,
because
it has practical
ecological
value in the
validity.
real world.
In the measurement sense, this asks whether scores
Ecological
reflect
validity.
functioning in the client's
In the measurement
actual life,
sense, asks
rather
this
than
asks
in the
whether scores
artificial
reflect
context of
functioning in the
assessment.
client's
So this
actual
then
life,
would be what
rather than
people
in the
really
want
want
to know.
artificial context of assessment. So this
Does
then
this
would be
ring
what
true
people
in real life?
really want to
Whatever
know.
your finding was. Does this ring true in real life? Whatever your finding was. Now we get construct validity. Now we get construct validity. Construct validity asks whether the measure behaves as the theory
Construct
says it should.
validity asks whether the measure behaves as the theory says
It
it
is
should.
established through a network of evidence.
So
It is established through a network of evidence
coming at the
issue from different places.
coming
And
at
looking
the,
at the
construct
issue
and
from
seeing
different
does it hold
places.
up?
And looking at the
Let's see.
construct and seeing does it hold up. Can we think of a
let's
construct in Gestalt therapy that did not hold up? Can we think of
Or at least at this time
a
doesn't seem
construct
to be
in
in
Gestalt
favor?
therapy that did not hold up? Or at least at this time doesn't seem to be in favor? How about individuality? The individual,
How about individuality?
what some people call a one-person psychology. The individual, what some
The
people
one-person
call
psychology
a one-person
that,
psychology, leads the therapist to investigate the one-person
elevate
psychology,
the awareness
that,
of the client.
leads the therapist to investigate the elevate the awareness of the client. Valid construct? Is that a valid construct? I think that's debatable. I still like it, but some people don't like it too much.
I think that's debatable. I'm still
Okay.
I still like
So
it. but-
let's see. Convergent
Some people
validity
don't like it
is
too
the
much.
measure correlates with other measures of the same
So
construct.
let's see. Convergent validity.
So the construct
is
is
the
measure
theory,
correlates
the
with
idea,
other
the
measures of the
concept.
same construct.
Convergent validity.
So
the construct is the
measure
theory, the
correlates
idea,
with other
the
measures
concept.
of the same
Convergent
construct.
validity.
The measure correlates with other
Discriminant
measures
validity.
of the same construct.
It does not correlate
strongly with measures of
discriminant
construct.
validity.
In other words,
It does not correlate
might correlate
strongly
with measures of
constructs
of
that
the same
are really
construct. In other
adverse
words,
or
it-
opposite.
It might correlate with
So it diverges.
constructs that are really
Adverse or opposite.
So it diverges. Structural validity, that the internal factor structure matches the theorized dimensions. Structural validity, that gets that the internal factor structure matches the theorized dimensions is a construction that gets its own attention and measurement everywhere. Why don't we even bring up the test construction people and come at it from that side? So why don't we even bring up the test construction people and come at it from Ansel Volz has done a lot of work constructing a test called Ansel Volz has done a lot of work constructing a test construction or questionnaire construction is usually where test construction or questionnaire starting researchers start is usually where it's because you're dealing with starting researchers, constructs, and not people. Why? It's because you're dealing with questions, you're not dealing with the therapeutic process. You're dealing with the ideas behind it. You're not dealing with support it, the therapeutic not directly. You're dealing with the ideas. It's a lot easier to do. Or that support and so, for instance, if you're a professor, people, and it's a lot easier to get do. And so, for instance, if you're a professor, you can say, well, let's all work on students that need to get that would measure X, Y, or Z. You can say, well, let's all work on building a test that would measure X, Y, or Z. You can write it up and be published. You get your degree, all that kind of a thing. There is value to these things. You can write it up and be published. For instance, the validity scale can be used. There is value to these things. To just get the good enough. For instance, the validity scale can be used in the study was Gestalt therapy. Just get the good enough. A validity scale is not sufficient. What was going on in the study was Gestalt therapy. Subtleties of a validity scale is not sufficient. It's very pragmatic. Discuss in terms of the research subtleties of theory. It's just it's very pragmatic in terms of there is one project. And Margarita Loeb has got and her there is one have, Margarita a test of Loeb has got I can't remember and the name of it. Colleagues have it's the aesthetic relational knowing. I can't remember the name of it. That's the test. It's the aesthetic relational knowing. Aesthetic relational knowing. That's in other words the test. When you're with someone, it's a test of how are you aesthetic relational knowing. In other words, what comes to mind as you're with them? How are you picking them up? You sense them. What comes to mind as you're with them? I think that's a great idea to have something that measures that, because then these I think that's a great idea to have something that measures that, because questionnaires, these kinds of scales can become instruments that you use when you do work questionnaires directly with people to can become instruments that you use when you do work with direct. But anyway, so this is all has to do with measurement, understand more of the therapeutic process. Now we get into anyway, so this is all validity. Has to do with measurement validity. And so this is the validity of now we get into inferential validity drawn from a study. And so this is the validity of conclusions. Statistical conclusion validity asks whether the inference about covariation statistical conclusion validity asks whether the inference that about covariation can be a philosophically technical term. It just means justified. That warranted is a that can be a philosophically given technical the statistical term. Analysis. It just means so justified. What are the threats to this? Given the low statistical analysis, power has to do what are the with threats the effect size, to this, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Low power. Power has to do with the effect size, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Yeah. So some other things are violated assumptions, unreliable measures. Some other things are violated assumptions. If you're measuring unreliable measuring stick, you're not going to get reliable results. If you're measuring with a false measuring stick, you're not going to get reliable restriction of range results. Some of these things are technical terms. Restriction of range, the inflated type 1 error. Type 1 error some of these things are technical terms. Statistical false the inflated positive. Type 1 error. Type 1 words, error is think that you proven the thing works positive. Statistically, words, but think your stats were off. Proven the thing works. Wrong in the study, statistically, but your stats were off. Yes, this is or something a good thing. Yes, it works in the study, and so it really doesn't. You say when yes, this is when people a good thing. Yes, it works. Study or there's more studies. It really doesn't. Later on, people find out. Whoops, when people try to replicate your study, or there's more studies. This comes from multiple comparisons. Whoops, heterogeneity, type 1 error. Heterogeneity. So this comes from multiple comparisons. Heterogeneity. All of these things add heterogeneity of treatment implementation process. So there's a lot of things to consider. When you look at the results of a study, and this is in the conclusions, so there's a lot of things to the discussion. When you look at the results of a study, and this is in the that's where people will say, where people do the discussion. The methods could have been a little bit more refined. That's where people will say, well, I think, so therefore the methods could have been a little bit more refined, blah, 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 this thing and that thing, so therefore I don't support. So to go back to what I said about reading research papers and so on and so forth. What I usually to go back to what I said about reading research papers. Not so what sharp. I usually do. I read the beginning of the paper where they talk about what they're interested in. Sharp. And I read the beginning of the paper, the way they're going to talk about what they're interested in. Then I skip to the and I look a little bit at the way they're going to do the author. Then I skip to the talking about discussion, what he did and the way he did it, because that's where the results that he got. The author talking about it. Not results about like statistical analysis he did it, and the results that he got. Talking about real world analysis, not results the inferences like statistical analysis because of the statistics. He's talking about real. So then there's analysis, internal validity, the inferences that he makes. That asks because of the whether the observed relationship. So then there's internal validity. Now that asks whether the observed relationship, whether the treatment, causal, rather than something else. Produce the outcome. Okay, so I'm going to continue. Whether the treatment, so rather than something else, they should be talking about make some kind of statement about in the discussion validity. Like they should be talking. Why about can we trust? Make some kind of statement about the classic threats are like history, how events outside. Why can we trust? These results. Maturation. The classic threats are history, just changed naturally events over outside of the treatment. Maturation, that mean there's a statistical thing naturally over time. There's a statistical to the mean. There's a statistical thing if you keep property that if you keep testing, keep testing, statistical. It all kind of property that migrates keep to the testing, center, keep testing, keep testing. The results get kind of watered down after a while. Migrates to the center, which is the mean. It just the results get kind of watered down after a while. Clients enter treatment when symptoms are worst and improve partly through statistical regression. Clients enter treatment when symptoms are worst and improve partly through statistical regression alone. The clients may not improve. Selection, the testing of them improves. So if you're testing for selection, something, then you want to have a broad. If you're testing for sample size. A broad something, then you want to have a broad, not just all one kind of a person. Sample size, a broad array of people drop out, not just all one kind of a person. Testing and instrumental effects, the tests were broke. Attrition, people drop out. Testing and instrumental effects, the tests were broke. The bad tests is an important factor. Randomization, when properly implemented, defends against most of the important factor. Randomization to internal when validity. Properly implemented, which is why most of the random controlled challenges to internal validity is the workhorse design. Which is why the random controlled trials.
In other
The
words,
RCTs
did
is the
the
workhorse
treatment
design
cause the result?
of efficacy studies.
Not just did it
Correlate
correlate
with it by,
did the
like
treatment
this happened and then
cause
that
the
happened. We
result?
don't know why, but
Not
that's
just
what
did
happened.
it correlate with it by, like
you can
this
make an
happened and then
inference
that
why,
happened. We don't
and
know
people
why,
do, but that's
but
what happened.
if you really want to be able to support
You can make
the
an
idea
inference
that this
why, and people
caused
do,
that, then
but
you
if
need
you really want to be
an
able to
efficacy
support
study,
the
and that's
idea
what an
that this
RCT
caused
is. It's a
that,
group
then you need
efficacy study.
an efficacy study, and that's
They're
what
hard
an
to do.
RCT is. It's
That's why
a
most of
group
them are done at the level of a
efficacy
university,
study.
because you have a lot of students that you
They're
can
hard to do.
That's why
Put
most
in
of them are
groups.
done at the level of a university, because you have a
The
lot of
single
students
case
that you
time
can
series research design
put in
is
groups.
a single person efficacy study.
The single case time series research design
But
is a
the weak
single
spot
person
of it
efficacy
is
study. The
selection
but
part.
the weak spot
How do you
of
pick
it
your
is
client?
how do you pick the subject? Anyway,
Selection
constructability of
How do you pick
causes and
your
effects.
client?
How do you pick the subject?
Asks whether the operational
Anyway,
treatment
constructability of causes and effects.
and the
Asks whether the operational
outcome
treatment
correspond to the theoretical constructs
and the
a
operational
person means to
outcome
study. So if the
correspond
person
to the
is
theoretical constructs
studying
a person
CBT, if
means
it's
to
a
study.
CBT
So if the
condition
person
is delivered with poor adherence and substantial process,
studying CBT,
drift
if a CBT
toward
condition
the process
is
drifts
delivered
toward
with poor
what are called
adherence and
common factors,
substantial
which we're
process,
not involved
drift
with at this
toward
point.
the process
What was
drifts
studied
toward
is
what are
not what
called
was
common
named.
factors, which we're not involved with at this point.
So what was studied is not what was named.
Bad deal.
That's why
So
they have manuals.
bad
That's
deal.
why research.
That's why
projects.
they have manuals.
People began to in outcomes psychotherapy.
That's why
outcomes,
research
started creating
projects,
these
research
cookbooks.
people began to in
some
outcomes,
people call them
psychotherapy
that,
outcomes.
started creating these
that detail
what
some
the
people
therapy
call them,
is
that
to be used
in the study, how you do it.
That detail.
Okay, so
what
there
is
a range
to be
of
used
these
in the
things
study.
called
How
treatment
you
manuals.
do it. Okay, so
On the extreme
there is a
level,
range
it is
of these things called
absolutely
treatment manuals.
mind-boggling.
On the extreme
so
level,
it is
absolutely
because
mind-boggling.
it details
every
it is
session
so restricted.
and every point of
because
each session,
it
what you're
details
doing,
every session
and what you're not doing,
and
by
every
implication, what you're
point
not doing
of each session,
and
what
it
you
does,
are doing,
and it also
and what you're not
stipulates
doing,
at the
by
beginning
implication what you're not doing,
what your population has
and
to
it
be.
does, and it also
So when I was
stipulates at the beginning
living in Bermuda,
what your population has to be.
a woman came in,
So when I was
psychologist from
England,
living in Bermuda,
she'd been trained in England,
a woman
and she
came
was
in,
really
a
steeped
psychologist
deeply
from
in England.
and
She'd been trained in England, and she was
according
really
to these treatment
steeped
manual
deeply in
mentality.
at the extreme level,
Evidence-based practice.
according to these treatment manual.
What did she learn? She
mentality.
learned therapy
At the extreme level.
in England.
So,
With a population.
what did she learn?
She learned therapy
That she wasn't working
in
with.
England.
She was
with a
working in
population
Bermuda
with a prison population
that she wasn't working with.
not general public population.
She was working in
so
Bermuda
everything that she was
with a prison
what could she do?
population, not general
She
public
could do nothing.
population. So
Actually,
everything that she was,
if you
she,
stuck
what
with
could
the
she
treatment
do?
manual,
She could do nothing.
I always
Actually,
thought that was interesting.
if you stuck with the treatment manual
Anyway,
approach,
so
the other end of the
thought that was
continuum
interesting.
is not like that. It's not
Anyway,
that extreme.
so
it is like
the other
it talks
end of the
about theory
continuum
in a more general
is not
and
like
philosophical,
that. It's not that
even
extreme.
philosophical
It is
kind
like
of way.
it talks
more
about theory
descriptive.
in a more general.
It is not
and
prescriptive.
philosophical.
It is
even
philosophical
descriptive.
kind of way.
It just says
more
in many of our
descriptive.
books that we
It is not
that people have written.
prescriptive. It is
on
descriptive.
different ways to work.
It just says, and many of our
articles
books that we
our people
that
have written
people
over the
have
years,
written,
they're descriptive
on different ways to work.
They could be used.
Articles
and I have
that,
suggested
our
that they
people
be
have written
used
over the
as
years,
their
treatment
descriptive.
manuals.
They could be
Legitimate
used, and I have
treatment
suggested
manuals,
that they be used
they would
as
be
treatment
considered that way.
manuals.
They're just not the
legitimate treatment
extreme
manuals.
kind.
because they would be considered that way. External validity asks whether findings generalize across populations. External validity, therapists, treatment variations, asks whether findings generalize across populations. Efficacy trials is that they're tightly selected samples, single diagnosis. The classic critique of efficacy trials is that no substance use, no suicidality, single diagnosis, no comorbidity, expert therapist use, no suicidality, so on and so forth. Are so tightly expert therapists involved. This tight thing again that they just don't exist in the real world. So tightly they exist. Again, this is this tight thing again on the college university campus. Don't exist in the real world. They exist like the person who came from on the college university campus with students. If you were to follow some of these studies, came from the only people you could work with were university students. If you were to follow some of these studies, the only people you could work with were university students. You want to know if it has external, whatever your results are, if they have external validity. You want to know if it has external, whatever your results are, if they have external validity. Can you hear that? No. Great, right. We've got the long people outside. I hope it. Can you hear that? Where we're at here. No. All right. So there is a gap. Let's see where we're at here. Now, can you hear it? So there is a gap. No? All right. So now just to let you know, there's a guy with a giant lawnmower outside my window. That's what's happening. So just to let you know, there's a guy with a giant lawnmower outside my window. That's what's happening. The effectiveness studies and practice research networks. The efficacy effectiveness gap. The effectiveness studies and practice ecological validity is related to this. It's like, does what you're doing, ecological validity is related to this. It's like, and they're using this term, what you're doing, ecological, and what they, is that related to the real world is, and they're using this term, ecological, and what that would mean to me is, so the environment, is the inference, the field, are the inferences being made? So concerning generalization, are the inferences being real made? World, clinical settings are concerning generalization into the real world. Clinical settings are or is it restricted? Sorry, any questions so far on that? Okay. Any questions so far on that? Now we get into some interesting things, treatment effects and effect sizes. Now we get into some interesting things, treatment effects and effect sizes. So this is a slightly different consideration than the statistical terminology. This is a slightly different consideration than the statistical terminology. But they're extremely important. Guy's driving me crazy. But they're extremely important. So there are different in terms of treatment effects. When we're doing there are different in terms of treatment we want effects. To know what are the things that go into affecting the outcome? Research, we want to know doing the research. What are the things that go into affecting the outcome? There are many things. We're doing the research. Many things could be studied. So I've just picked three. There are many things. Okay, so here, many things could be studied. One kind of consideration is three. Focusing on the therapist. Okay, so here, what is there about kind of consideration is focusing on the therapist. What is there about the therapist? Could be a positive or a negative effect. It has an effect. It somehow affects the outcomes. Could be a positive or a negative effect. That it somehow affects discussion, the outcome. When you're making inferences, and when you're doing based on the statistical results, discussion. When you're making some of inferences, some of these factors
based on
that
statistical
results
need to be considered.
So
Some of these
effects are
some of these
factors that affect outcome need to be considered.
Second one is
therapist effects are some of those.
what a Gestalt therapist would call field effects.
Second one is extra therapeutic,
or what a Gestalt therapist would call field
That's,
effects.
that's a little bit of both
And when you talk about field, but I'll show you what I mean.
That's
Extra
that's a
therapeutic,
little
what
bit
it
of
usually
both
had
and when you
meant
talk
was
about field, but
what happens
I'll show
outside
you
of
what I mean.
therapy. Like
Extra
on the way
therapeutic, what
to
it
the
usually
therapy
had
session.
meant was,
So
what
a person's
happens
driving down the road
outside of therapy,
a child
like
runs out
on
in
the way
front
to
of
the
them,
therapy session.
They so
run
a
into the
person's
child,
driving down the road.
they have to deal with
a child
the
runs
trauma
out in front
of having
them,
hit a child.
They and
run
deal
into
with
the
a police
child.
officer.
They have to deal
and
with
then
the
deal with all
trauma
of the guilt
of
and
having hit
everything
a
that
child.
comes up and
inside
deal
of
with
them
the police
on their way to the
officer,
therapy session.
and then deal with
So,
all of the guilt and the
how do you
everything
think that
comes
therapy
up
session is
inside of them
go?
on their way to the therapy session?
What
So,
kind of influence does
How do you think that therapy
the
session,
world
session
outside
is
of the
go?
therapy room
have
what
on
kind
what
of
happens
influence
inside
does
the therapy room?
the
That's
world
extra
outside of the
therapeutic,
therapy room
effects have
Then
on
there's
what happens
also
inside the
time
therapy
in
room.
which
That's
sequences,
extra therapeutic
the distance
effects.
between
Then there's
start to
also
stop
time
within
in which
events,
sequences and the distance
between start to
time
stop
being
within
a
events,
sequence of events.
and the
So you're
distance
like what we're dealing with
time
here is the
being
time
a
between
sequence of events.
so you're
certain
like
events.
what we're dealing with here is the time between
Therapist
effects.
So these are
events.
some effects that have already been
Therapist
identified.
effects.
So these
But
are
therapist effects
some
are the
effects that
amount
have
of
already
variability
been
in the results
identified.
in
But
patient
therapist
outcomes
effects are the amount
you
of
can attribute
variability
to
in the
unexplained
results
differences in patient
between
outcomes
therapists.
that you can attribute to
Some
unexplained
differences between
therapists
can be explained.
Some
But
differences
there's always,
between
because
therapists
if
can
you're
be
doing a study where
explained.
you're looking at the effect of
But there's
something
always
dialogue
because
or whatever,
if you're doing a study
across
where you're looking
therapists,
at the effect
you got a number of
something
therapists
in your
dialogue
study,
or whatever.
so there's going to be
across
differences between
therapists.
those therapists.
You
and the
got a
way that
number
they
of
work.
therapists in your
It
study.
affects the outcomes. Okay,
So there's going to be differences between those
what
therapists
leads
and
to
the way that they
positive
work.
outcomes? Therapists
It affects the outcomes.
that have
Okay,
so
good interpersonal skills.
what leads to positive
including
outcomes?
verbal
Therapists
fluency,
that have
warmth,
good interpersonal
that have
skills,
acceptance, empathy,
including
and,
verbal
and
fluency,
that have
an
warmth,
ability to
that
identify
have
how a
acceptance,
patient is
empathy,
feeling,
and
people that
and
just
we could say
an
people who
ability
can
to identify
connect.
how a patient is feeling.
People that
just
where
we
I
could
work
say
at the clinic,
people who can connect.
it's highly managed care.
It's the
Where I work
electronic
at the
health
clinic,
record is just a
it's
monster.
highly managed
And
care.
you are forced
to
the
get
electronic health
information
record
in the
is
first
just a
sitting with
monster.
someone,
And you are
to come up with a
forced to get
diagnosis.
information
So
in
that's
the
community
first
mental health
sitting
where I
with
work.
someone.
So
To
one
come up with a
patient,
diagnosis.
a patient told
So
me
that's community mental health
that
where I work.
they so
Didn't want to
one
work with a
patient-
particular therapist
a
because
patient
that
told me
therapist was
that they,
asking questions and doing
didn't want to work with a particular
and
therapist
what
because that
means
therapist
is they were typing
was
into
asking
the
questions and
electronic
doing
health record with their back turned to the patient.
And what that
Asking
means
them
is they were typing
questions.
into the
Do
electronic
this, do
health
that,
record with
what
their
were you-
back
where
turned
you
to the
live,
patient.
How many
Asking
people in
them
your family?
stuff
Questions.
like that. Do this,
So
do that.
it's
What were you-
like,
where you live?
really, I'm not.
How many
doing
people in your
that.
family?
I don't
Stuff
do
like
that.
that.
So
it's
I
like
bagged
really, I'm not
the
doing
typing
that.
of the questions
I don't
on the
do
first
that.
session, and
what am I trying to do? I'm trying to connect
the typing of the
I'm trying to
questions on the
find
first
some
session, and what am I
commonality
trying
in
to
some
do?
way, but
I'm
beyond
trying to
that,
connect.
we both live in the same
trying
town,
to
or we
find
both grew up in
some
another place, or we
commonality
were in
in some
4-H
way,
or
but
whatever.
beyond that
we
is
both live in the
just
same
this,
town, or we both grew up in another
almost
place, or we were in
intangible
4-H or whatever.
quality
Is
of
just this,
I guess the closest
almost
thing that came to it in that list was
intangible
warmth.
quality
There's some
of
kind of
feeling thing.
I guess the
going on
closest
between
thing
us.
that came to it in that list was warmth.
The aesthetic
some
relational
kind of
feeling,
knowing,
I suppose, going on between us,
you could say. But
the aesthetic relational
that's a knowing.
that's trying to capture it still.
You could say.
It's still trying words and concepts
But
trying to catch
that's a living thing
trying to
that's
capture
happening
it still
between two people.
It's still trying
And that's what I'm
words and
going for in the
concepts
first
trying to
session.
catch
Anyway.
a living thing that's happening.
A person, a
between two
therapist that
people.
can connect, and that's what I'm going
better
for in the
outcomes.
first session. Anyway,
Successful
a therapist
that
can
form
connect
strong therapeutic
better
alliances
outcomes.
with a range of patients and
Successful
are able to
therapists can also
induce them
form
to
strong
accept the
therapeutic
treatment
alliances
with a
them.
range of
So
patients and
this
are able
is
to
beyond
induce them to accept the treatment
motivational
and work with
interviewing.
them.
So
this
motivational
is
interviewing
beyond
is a systematic manipulation,
motivational
in my
interviewing.
opinion.
This
And
is
I think
motivational
it's got to
interviewing
do
is
more
a
with that
systematic
thing,
manipulation.
in my
Successful
opinion.
therapy,
And I think it's got to do
through
more with
competent
that warmth
therapists.
thing. That
Successful
is where a
therapist
through
builds an
competent
alliance
therapists
with the client and
is
is
where
able
a
to
therapist
have an influence.
builds
The
an
therapist
alliance
becomes an important
the
person.
client
and is
There's
able to
been
have
studies
an
and outcomes that talk
the
about
therapist
effect
becomes
of
an important person.
You talk to people,
There's been
and they
studies
talk
and
about
outcomes that
people who
talk
have been
about
in
the
their lives who
effect
have
of
been
an
influential on
important
them.
person.
You talk to people,
They call them
and
an
they talk
important
about
person.
people
It's
who have
actually
been
become
in
a
their
technical
lives who have
term.
been influential
So
on them.
teachers, for instance,
they call them an
are
important
typically
person.
important people.
It's actually
in the
become
lives
a technical term
of other
So
people because
teachers,
they can look
for
back
instance,
and say,
are
"Oh,
typically
well, Mrs.
important
Wagner,
people in the lives
I'll
of
never forget her
of other people
Why?
because
Because
they
she
can
was an
look back and
important
say,
person.
"Oh,
By the
well,
way,
Mrs.
Mrs.
Wagner
Wagner was an actual
I'll never
teacher
forget
that
her.
I had.
Why?
And
Because she was an
she
important
left
person.
quite an impression
By the
on
way,
me
Mrs.
because she
Wagner
would
was an
come up
actual
next to
teacher
me
that I
and
had,
grab
and
this
she
muscle
left quite
right
an
here
impression
and
on me because
put
she
her
would
thumb into
come
it
up
so that
next
it
to me
pinched a
and
nerve
grab this
when she wanted me
muscle
to
right
pay
here
attention.
and put her thumb into it so that it
But she
pinched
had
a
other
nerve
qualities
when she
that
wanted
made
me
her
to pay attention.
attractive to me. But
I
she had
listened to
other
her.
qualities that
Okay.
made her attractive to
Therapists
me.
that
I
track
listened to her.
patient progress.
Okay.
Therapists
It's
that
not just that
track
you're sitting there
patient
rambling
progress.
from one session to another. Where are
So,
you at today? What are you
it's
thinking
not
about
just
today?
that you're sitting there
Well, last week we
rambling
were talking
from
about
one
something else.
session to
And the
another.
week before that, it
Where are
was
you at
something else
today?
again.
What are you thinking about
And the
today?
week before that, your pet
Well, last week
died.
we were talking
And,
about
you're just
something
kind of
else.
wandering
And the
around.
week before that, it was
the
something
here
else
and
again.
now. And the week
Now
before
I
that,
am
your
aware
pet
that.
died.
And
Kind
you're
of,
just kind of wandering around in
experiences.
the here
No.
and now.
Now
Like
I
this
am
person
aware that
came to therapy
kind of,
for some reason, right?
experiences.
And so
No.
it's
like
the
this person
therapist
came to
keeps
therapy for
track,
some reason,
keeps
right?
in
And
mind
so
what is this person
the
here
therapist
for?
who
Are we
keeps
getting
track
to that?
keeps in mind.
Now,
What
it's,
is
you're not
this
going to get
person
that
here
in the
for?
first session.
Are we getting to that?
What the managed care people want me to do.
Now,
That's just
you're not going to
gonna
get
happen.
that in the first session.
I don't discover
Like,
what that
what
person's
the
really
managed care
after
people want me to do
until
That's
later.
just not going to happen.
I don't discover
Somewhere
what that
down the
person's
line.
really after
But you need
until
to keep
later. Somewhere down the line. I don't believe that.
Oh, sorry, could you repeat the last phrase?
Even if
Because
they're
I
really
missed
competent in
the
tracking
second.
progress,
I don't
can
believe that
get to
that
what
the
the
patient
therapist,
really
even if they're
came for.
really
What are they
competent in tracking
wanting?
progress, can
It's not,
get to
to
what
me,
the
it's
patient
also
really
not,
came for. What are they
where
wanting?
the therapist knows better
It's
than
not,
the client.
to me, it's also
Let me interpret
not,
what you're saying.
let me interpret your
the
life
therapist
now. This
knows
is what
better
I
than the
think you
client.
really need, what you're really
Let me
after
interpret
here.
what you're
Let
saying.
me
Let me
take care of you.
interpret
It's not like
your
that.
life now. This is
It's
what
like
I think you really
together,
need, what you're really after
we
here.
arrived at,
Let me take care of you. It's not like that.
That's
It's like
something.
together,
isn't it?
we
Yeah.
arrived at,
And then the patient is going,
that's something.
okay,
isn't it?
therapist
Yeah.
sticks to a
And then the
cohesive
patient is
and
going,
well-structured therapeutic model. So,
okay,
therapist sticks to
better
a
outcomes
cohesive and
happen
well-structured
when a
therapeutic
therapist
model.
has been trained in a model and sticks to it.
Better outcomes happen
model
when a
informs
therapist has been trained in a model. That's whether it's Gestalt or it's
the model
ACT
informs
or whatever it is,
the practice,
or CBT, whatever.
That's whether it's Gestalt or it's ACT or whatever it is.
Extra therapeutic
or
field
CBT,
effects.
whatever. So this is a substantial portion of therapeutic
Extra-therapeutic field
attributable
effects.
to variables operating
So this is a
outside the
substantial
formal
portion of
treatment
therapeutic
encounter.
change attributable to
This
variables
this is a client
operating
characteristics,
outside the formal treatment
life
encounter.
circumstances,
This
this
is a client
spontaneous
characteristics,
remission, life
fortuitous events
circumstances,
between sessions,
social support
and
network,
the client's
spontaneous
ongoing
remission,
self-organization.
fortuitous events between sessions,
Because to me,
and the client's ongoing
the
self-organization.
change happens out there.
The change
Because
happens
to me,
after they've left.
the change
Yes,
happens
there are those
out there.
very touching moments.
The change happens
after
people
they
might
left.
say the cathartic moments.
Yes, there are those very touching moments.
Those
Some people
or
might say
aha
the
moments when
cathartic
you
moments
realize
inside
something.
of the client,
Inside
puts two
the
and two
therapy
together in
session.
front of you.
But when they
or
change
aha
their
moments when you
behavior
realize
and do something
the client
different,
puts
is
two and two
out there.
together in front of you.
But when they change
There's
their
a movie called
behavior
As Good
and
as
do
It
something
Gets.
different is out there with Jack Nicholson. I don't know if you
There's
ever
a
get
movie
chance
called
to
As
see
Good
that
as It
movie.
Gets.
Is great with
This
Jack
completely
Nicholson.
obsessive
I don't know if
compulsive
you
guy
ever get a chance to see
with all
that
kinds
movie,
of rituals
is great. This
Forgets
completely obsessive
to do them.
compulsive guy with all kinds of rituals,
and
it's why is that?
forgets to do them.
It's the therapy of life, I suppose.
And
it's the effect of a
why
special
is that?
person, the waitress that he where
It's
he
the therapy of life,
goes to
I
have his
suppose. It's the
customary
effect of a special
ritualistic
person,
meal.
the waitress that
She
where
gets
he
under his skin.
goes to
It's a
have
great
his
movie.
customary
Anyway, things happen outside.
ritualistic meal.
Extra therapeutic
She gets under his
effects.
skin.
It's a great movie. Anyway, things happen outside.
Extra therapeutic
From a
effects.
field theoretical standpoint, though, the therapeutic situation is not an isolated container.
From a field
into
theoretical
which
standpoint,
extraneous
though,
factors
the therapeutic situation
they
is
leak
not
into
an
it from the
isolated
outside.
container into
It
which
is itself a
extraneous
configuration
factors
within
leak
a larger
in. They leak into it
phenomenological
from the
field
outside.
that
It is
includes the
itself a
client's
configuration
relationships, history,
within a
somatic
larger
life,
phenomenological
cultural
field
linguistic horizon
that includes the
all
client's
kinds of things,
relationships, history,
right? And
somatic
so the
life,
out there
cultural,
is always
linguistic
in here.
horizon, all kinds
And
of
it
things,
accounts
right?
for the largest amount
And so
of
the
variance.
out there is always in
When they've done
here.
outcome
And
studies,
it accounts for the
what are the
largest
factors
amount
relating
of
to
variance.
outcomes, positive outcomes.
When they've done
what
outcome
they
studies,
found
what
over
are the
and over
factors
again,
relating
this
to
comes from
outcomes,
common
positive
factors
outcomes.
kinds of
What
end of
they
research.
found over and
Is
over
that
again,
this
this
comes
comes
from
from
the
the
common
common
factors
factors
can
end of
account to
research.
as much as 40%.
Is that the extra therapeutic
40%
factors
can
account to as much as
outcomes.
40%.
40%
The relationship
of the would account for 30%.
outcomes.
Now, when I say that, and I give
the
you
relationship
that statistic,
would account
that
for 30%.
has to be under. You have to understand that's
Now, when I say
that's
that, and I
one
give you that statistic,
that has to be under. You have to
batch of
understand that's
literature
that's
that
one
and studies that have that talk about it that way. 40%, 30%.
batch
It's
of literature
not
that
precise.
and studies that have.
So there's a
that,
range
talk about
of
it that way.
40%, 30%.
But
It's
the main
not
idea
that
is
precise.
the
So there's a
majority
range
of
effects there, right?
outcome.
But
The main
is
idea
attributed
is
to extra
the
therapeutic
majority
factors.
of
the real
outcome
world in which the person
is attributed
lives.
to extra therapeutic
factors.
time.
The real world in which the person
Time in
lives.
psychotherapy outcomes is studied primarily
Time.
through three overlapping lenses.
Time in psychotherapy
I hate
outcomes
the terminology,
is studied
but
primarily
it's
through
useful.
three
Dose
overlapping
response,
lenses. Individual
I hate the
trajectory
terminology,
and
but
discontinuous
it's
change, which
Dose
is like sudden
response,
gain. Just kind of just suddenly
individual
happens.
trajectory
just a
and
surge in the
discontinuous
process.
change, which is like sudden gain.
So
just kind of just suddenly happens. Just a surge in the process.
how does the person respond to the treatment?
So the treatment, like,
How does the person
Like,
respond?
how does the
to
person
the
respond to
treatment?
being with you?
So the treatment
this week,
like
I even don't like that. Like,
how did they
does the
respond
person
to it last
respond to
week?
being with you? That
This
is the
week.
dose response thing. So how much time
How did
is
they
needed
respond to it last
to
week?
be with a person? That is the
In
dose
order
response
to,
thing. So how much time is needed
good
to
dose
be with a
response?
person?
how much in order to, dose would be time. How much time get good? I'm going to dose response. Pardon me for speaking this way. I'm going to dose my client with 10 minutes. How much time do I'm going to dose? No, I'm going to increase that dose to 30 minutes. This way. I'm going to dose my client with 10 minutes, 40 minutes. I'm going to I'm going to increase that dose to 30 minutes to get a therapeutic. Now I'm going to increase the dose to 40 minutes. How much time 50% do we need? Will improve to get a therapeutic people effect. Will improve after 8 sessions. About 50% will improve after 75 to 80% will improve after 26 sessions. This is just statistically what 75 to 80% will improve after 26 sessions. So that's kind of mechanistic. Statistically what people have found in research studies. So that's kind of we might say it's just not, you can't do it like that. You can't say it's like it's not. We might say that's just not, statistically you can't do it like that. You found these results because why? You're say that you're not statistically with people. You found these results because why? This one you're not who came to you today. People in the study. You're dealing with this one who came to you today. Unique meeting. It's not an individual. An average. So time becomes relative meeting to when client and therapist find a good enough stopping point. So time becomes relative to when client and therapist research now distinguishes duration, the time period over which therapy is delivered. So dose research now distinguishes duration, the time period contact is made, and the delivered of the length of each contact. So how often contact is made, the amount how often you meet, the length of each contact. Also, how much time you spend when time can be considered as how often you meet. The longer you spend, but also how much time you spend when you meet. And the research shows that the longer you spend, right now in my clinic, there's one therapist who's absolutely pulling his hair out because he wants to meet. Right now in my clinic, there's one therapist who's absolutely pulling his hair out than the 45 minutes. He wants to meet 50 minutes and 55 minutes, and somebody would say, like a supervisor might say, minutes we're supposed to meet. You need that time, and somebody would say, like a supervisor might say, before the next client comes, because we see him. You need that time. You need that 15 minutes before the next client comes. So you have to stop at 45. Well, I need to stop at 50. It's just, I need more time than that. I want to stop at 55. So you have to stop at 45. Well, I need somebody to stop at 50. Are you kidding me? Does it really matter? I'm going to stop at 55. 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And somebody could say, are you kidding me? Does it really matter? It makes a difference. 10 minutes, 15 minutes. The longer you can meet with somebody. Much difference? It does. And there's going to be a drop off, of course. It makes a difference. But the longer you can meet with somebody, and there's going to be a drop off, of course. Treatment effects. But now effect size. The better the outcome. Effect size is a standardized index of the magnitude of the effect size is a standardized index of the magnitude of the difference of the phenomenon or the strength of a relationship. What's going on of the expressed in units that allow comparison across studies or the strength of a relationship. This is really important. Expressed in units that allow comparison across studies, measures, and samples. Moved on from. Does therapy work? Because the whole field of research studies show that moved on from does therapy work? What the therapy is, it all works. Research studies show does it work the same amount? Doesn't matter what the therapy is. Up and down, maybe according to therapist. Does it work the same given study amount? But generally speaking, up and down, maybe according to therapist effects in a given study. So now the question is about the same. Did it work in a particular study? Say you're doing so a particular now the question study. Is not the question. Did it work? Is not going to be a particular study. Say you're doing a particular study. How much? The question did it work is not going to be. What were the particular factors in your therapy? How much more powerful than others? And what were the particular factors in your therapy? So that's what that were more powerful than others. Because if you can measure the strength of the that's what the effect size is for. Component because of the, if you can measure the strength of the, then you can say, oh, this is the most influential thing that I do. Treatment of the therapy. then you can say,
So
oh,
the most
this is the
most
influential thing that I do.
The most influential thing that I can do.
So the most
is to make an initial connection
most
with the
influential
client
thing that I can do
within the first
is
session.
to make an initial connection
Second
with the
session
with
at
the
the
client.
most.
If I
Within
haven't
the
got them by
first
then,
session.
I probably am not going to.
Second session at the
Just
most.
something that doesn't.
If I haven't got them by then, I probably am
between us.
not going to.
That's in my experience.
Just
So
something that
that's where
doesn't
Gestalt
work
therapy used to be
between
with
us.
regard to
That's in my
outcomes.
experience.
I
So
actually had people
that's
telling me,
where
"I don't need to
Gestalt
have research
therapy used to be
telling
with
me that it
regard
works.
to
I know
outcomes."
that it works. How do you know
I
it works?
actually had people telling
Because
me,
my
I don't need
my
to have
patients
research
telling me
that it works.
I
My
know that it
patients
works. How do you
show
know it
that
works?
works.
Because my patients
Okay,
tell me that
but
it
you
works.
can't take that to
My
the bank.
patients
You can't
show
take
that
that
it
to the world out there
Okay,
that wants evidence.
but you can't take that
because
to
it's
the
just
bank. You
like,
can't
okay,
take
it
that
works for
to,
you, and you think it's
the
good.
world
and
out
you
there
and your
that
patients
wants
are having a good
evidence,
time
because
because
it's just like, okay, it
what
works
is it
for
that you
and
do
you think it's good, and
that makes
you
it
and your
work?
patients
Oh.
are having a good time. But and you've got theories and things
What
like
is
that,
it
but
that
you don't
you
have any
do
hard evidence.
that makes it
So
work?
this is
Oh. This effect size,
and you've got theories and things
is
like that, but you don't have any
one of
hard
the most
evidence.
important
So
things
this
that
is
you can
this
come up
effect
with
size
doing
research
is
and what it does is
one
it
of the most
allows you to
important
compare
things that you can come up
between
with
studies
doing research
in what is called
and what it does is
meta-study.
it
So you have
allows you to
individual
compare
study between
and that's
studies,
fine, and you write
in
that
what
up.
is called meta-study.
But then
so you have
if
individual
you
study,
want to really put
and
a
that's
lot
fine,
of
and you write that up.
evidence support
But then
underneath what you're
if
doing.
you want to
What you
really
do is you
put a
do
lot of
a meta study where you
evidence
have
support
lots of different
underneath
studies
what you're doing,
and you
what
compare
you
the
do is
results
you
of
do
them. So
a
what
meta
kinds of
study where you
results?
have lots
The
of different
size
studies
of the
and you
effect.
compare the results of them. So
That's
what
the
kinds
thing
of
that people
results
are looking at.
The size of the effect.
This thing called a p-value,
That's
that's
people are
just
looking
a
at.
statistical term or designation for
This thing called a
effect size.
p-value, that's
Effect
just
size
a
is computed in
statistical
different ways
term
or
don't wanna get into
designation
that.
for effect size. Effect size is computed
that's
in different
that.
ways. Here
wanna
it
get
is.
into that.
The effect size, one of the
so that's
ways to do
that.
it is to compare the difference
Here it
between
is.
the means, the
The
average.
effect size,
One of the
results
ways to do it is to
across,
compare the
subjects.
difference between the means, the average of results across subjects. Okay, that's that. We have, and
Okay,
15 minutes
that's that.
maybe. We have, what do you think? About 15 minutes maybe? Does this if you started off
What do you
being
think?
interested in research, has this completely
Does this,
blown you away from it?
if you
Is it just
started off being
are
interested
you
in
like
research,
me,
has this
mathematically
completely
challenged, blown you away from it? Is it just like,
Are you interested?
are you like
are
me,
you conversely, are you
mathematically
a
challenged?
stats person?
When I
Are you
worked
interested?
with some other people doing a research
conversely, are you a
project out of
stats person?
Chile. When
We
I worked
needed a
with
stats
some other
person,
people
so we
doing a
found
research project out of
Ilya, I
Chile.
never can pronounce his last name.
We needed a stats
And,
person, so we found
Skibowski.
Ilya. I never can pronounce his last name. He was our stats person,
Skibowski.
and I was
Okay.
thankful for him every minute along
he
the
was our
way.
stats person.
And
So you
I
need
was
somebody
thankful for
to do
him
the stats
every
if you're going to have a
minute
research.
along
That's
the
why
way.
it's good to work in teams.
So you need somebody
Research
to do the
teams.
stats if you're going to have a
Because you have a
research. That's
number
why
of
it's
people
also it's
working
good to
together on a
work in
project.
teams, research teams, because you have a number of people working together on a project. I think the next lecture is going to be on publishing. And
I
that's
think
a
the
whole
next
different world.
lecture is
Publishing.
going to be on
So,
publishing.
and that's a whole different world. Publishing.
What
So what are you sitting with at the end of this? At this point in this lecture,
I
what
wonderful if you
are
can
your-
turn off the sharing.
where
that
what
way
are
I
you
could
sitting
see
with at the
everybody
end of
or
this?
and
At
you.
this point in this lecture.
Wonderful if you can turn off the sharing. That way I could see everybody or and you.
Sure.
Oh, there are people there. Great.
Um,
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, there are people
Bill,
there.
before
Great.
we come to discussion, can I say a few words?
All
Yeah,
right.
Phil, before
No,
we come to
before what?
discussion, can I say before we begin this discussion and questions, I want to say a few words. No? Can I do
Before
it?
what?
Yeah. Before we begin this discussion and questions, I want to say a few words which will take place in September. I want to invite everyone to first Gestalt Research Conference in Ukraine in September, and this year to warmly first Gestalt Research Conference in Ukraine, and all information in this chat. You can just click to the invite you to this event, and all information. So it's a big event for Ukraine. Just click to the link because and see it's first conference. So it's a big event for Ukraine. Such kind of conference, and because actually Philip Brownell conference also will be there. Such kind of conference,
Yeah.
and actually Philip Brownell also will be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is the main one that we need
Thank you
to
for your attention.
copy down?
Yeah.
Registration.
Which is the main one that we need to copy down?
Yeah. Or registration. Registration is the main one. So.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Or before this, I
Good.
can
Just
say
clip
it
it.
again.
Put that there. Thank you. I want to thank you, Phil, for this presentation. I want to thank you, Phil, for it's got me thinking again. I've always been averse to the statistical stuff. It's got me thinking again. I think you've raised so many things, but it also raises many questions for me. And I think you've raised so many things, but it also raises many questions for me. I want to thank you for these things. I'm very happy to have been here and to I have an idea of a research project that would be interesting for me. I have absolutely no idea. I have an idea of a research project that I'm interested nowadays in the question of violence. I have absolutely no idea how to do it. But I'm interested nowadays in the question of violence and the question of loss. People experiencing I'm interested if there's any research on grieving. Definition of grief and grieving. I'm interested if there's any research on the because they look definition of grief and there are phenomenologically, I believe, very different. They look the same, and I don't know if there's any research that has been done to distinguish very different between these because I see a lot of people simply who are grieving done to distinguish being put on antidepressants between these because I see a lot of people simply who are grieving because then they're not put on antidepressants with their experience of loss, because then they're not in contact is healing. But we take their possibility their experience of loss, which in the context is healing. It's just an interesting. But we take that possibility away when we put them on. And I want to thank you for that. So it's just an interesting. Can we have a look at these so many interesting things? And I want to thank you for that. Can we have a look at these slides? Can we get them? Can we look? Can we read? It's too much for me to just take it all in.
What do you mean to look at them?
Can we get them? Can we look? Can we read? It's too much for me to just take it all in.
I sent them to Alexei. They could be get them from me too, but let's see. You can get them from you have my email address. You can get them from me.
No, I can get
too,
them from
but,
Alexa. I don't want to bother you, but that's great. I
address?
appreciate that. Thank you. No, I can get them from Alexa. I don't want to bother you, but that's great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, Jay.
I heard this.
It was good to see you after so long.
Yeah.
Just read about you.
Nice to see you again.
It is good to see you after so long. Thank you. Just read about you. Okay. Thank you.
I would like to hear some other voices, even through the translator. I would like to hear static other voices, and even through the translator, I see static. Can you, if it's not on this subject, if it's just like on research in general, what is it to you? Can you, if it's not on this subject, if it's just like on research in general, what is it to you personally? Why bother?
Я би хотіла, мабуть, сказати, Да, стосовно того, що сьогодні почула, я декілька разів себе запитала, що
I'd
я
like to
тут
say.
роблю, тому що з математикою у мене так само
What I've heard today,
питання. У
I
мене не
asked
було басейну, у
myself
мене були свої
several times
такі
what I'm doing here
цікаві процеси, які
because
повпливали на
I have
мої
the
стосунки
same
з
issue with
математикою.
mathematics.
Але я щиро вважаю, що розділяти науку і практику так
I
само хибно,
had
як
I
психіку і
didn't have
тіло,
that
тому що це
hitting in
єдиний
the swimming
організм,
pool, but I
це
had some processes that had
особистість,
impact on my
і те дуже
relationships with
важливо,
math. But I think that
і наука, і
separating
практика, і тому ви
science and
тут, і
practice
мені дійсно було
is
цікаво.
so
Я
wrong
взяла для
as
себе
separating psyche
декілька
and
важливих
body.
речей, а
Like
до
both
багатьох з них я
things,
ще буду повертатися. Я
science
щиро
and
вдячна
practice
вам
is
за лекцію.
important. It was very interesting for me, and I took several important things for
Thank you. I
myself,
really
and
like what you said about
I'm sincerely
the
grateful to you
separating
for that.
science from thank you. I really like what you said about. I think you're right. The separating science from psyche and things like that. Yeah, I think you're right. What's the weather like, Anna? What's the
У
weather
нас
like, Anna?
спекотно. Я перебуваю в Німеччині, тут дуже жарко.
You're in Germany. Okay. How
I'm
about
in
others?
Germany now, and it's really
Anybody
hot.
else want to? You're in
share
Germany.
something?
Okay. How about others? Anybody else want to
Я б хотів.
share something?
Спершу хочу подякувати, Філіп, за цікаву лекцію і за ті, що були до цього. Зараз пишу дисертаційне дослідження
First, I want to
про
thank you,
вплив
Philip, for an
гештальт-терапії
interesting
на
lecture.
самоспівчуття і
And for the
соціально-психологічну
previous ones,
адаптацію.
I'm writing
І
my
сьогодні був дуже радий
dissertation.
побачити, що 8 сесій, а
The
я саме
impact of
так
Gestalt
зараз
therapy
8 сесій працюю індивідуально та в
on
груповій терапії.
self-compassion and social
Достатньо
adaptation. And
є
it was great to see that
науково
about each session.
достатнім для
And
того, щоб побачити
my,
ефект. Так
so
що моя
it's the same
напруга
what
трохи
I do, like
зменшилася,
that 8
і ще
sessions within
з'явились
the research.
аргументи для рецензентів.
It can be sufficient to
Дякую,
observe
Філіп.
some effect. So my tension has decreased, and I've got more arguments for my like
Yes.
for my colleagues.
Great.
That I can use it.
Yes.
So I've got enough arguments.
I am great. So happy to see people doing research. I am elements of Gestalt therapy. So happy to see people doing research. So when on elements of Gestalt therapy, Alexei decided to start the research association. So when Alexei decided to start was going to happen association in Ukraine. Where it made total sense that it was going to happen in Ukraine. Where tried for years to get us to start a research association elsewhere. We tried for years to get us to start a research association, not going to happen. And so the fact that you're doing it in Ukraine and not going to happen. That there are people starting the fact that do research. Actually, you're doing it in Ukraine and therapy. That there are people starting to the evidence actually do research on Gestalt therapy. Evidence-based tradition. The research tradition. The evidence has the best chance. Evidence-based tradition. Actually, research becoming established has the best chance. And just as Ukraine is becoming established, going to be teaching the rest of the world about how to do and conduct just as Ukraine is going to be teaching the rest of the world you about guys are probably going to teach us how to do research by showing us. You guys are probably going to teach us how to do research by showing us. All right, I have to go and meet with. All right, I have to go and meet with. So I need to get myself managed care people ready for that. Where I work, and I appreciate the time that I've had to get myself ready for that. Look forward to seeing people again. I appreciate the time that I've had with you, and look forward
Thank you,
to
Phil.
seeing
Дякую,
people
Філ,
again.
дуже
Thank you.
дякую
So I'm
за
gonna have
цікаву
to
лекцію.
leave.
Побачимось наступного разу 23
Thank you,
червня.
Phil.
Thank you very much, Phil, for an interesting lecture. So we will meet next time, June 23.
Okay.